Hey, everybody. Welcome to your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad to have all of you with me today, and I'm hopeful that you'll want to join into this conversation because it's going to be a good one, whether you are coming to us on Facebook or via LinkedIn. If you want to participate, the way to do it is to just drop a comment in the chat or a question in the chat. I'll be very happy to weave them into our conversation. Meanwhile, as always, take a sec, tell me who you are and where you're watching from. My guest today is a terrific one. But before I bring her on, I'd like to ask all of you to picture in your mind an unlikely retirement scenario. Imagine that a person has a career that spans decades. First, as a social worker, then goes back to school, finishes her PhD, and becomes a full-time university professor. Another decade or so goes by, and then goes on to become an Instagram influencer with nearly 1 million followers, as well as a fashion model for deals and brands, including Valentino. Now imagine that the person does all of those later things in her 60s. My guest today, Lynn Slater, checked all of those boxes, and then she gave it all up. Why did she do that? How did she do it in the first place? Today, she is going to answer all of those questions. She's also going to talk about her new book. It's called How to Be Old: Lessons in Living Boldly from the Accidental Icon. The book is a memoir. It chronicles her journey from retired professor to social media star, and she'll share the most important lessons, financial and otherwise, that she learned along the way. Lynn, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So take me back a bit to, as they call it in the superhero movies, your origin story. You were working as a social worker, decided you might be done with that. You were going to enter the field of academia, and then all of this fame came around in your 60s. Tell us a bit about your history in your own words.
Well, I think I've always been a rebellious person. I've always sort of challenged the norms of what I should do and when I should do it. I became a social worker when I was in my 20s, right after I finished my first master's. And I have always, when I get to a place where I feel like I've mastered something or the system I'm working in is not allowing me to do what I need to do, I've always kind of gone outside the system and just done something very creative and very outside of the box. And so I've taken improv classes and documentary filmmaking and creative writing, many writing classes, photography. And then I come back into my work and I bring this sort of new skill set, and it really changes how I'm working and makes it interesting again. And so I had gotten to the point where I had been a professor for about 15 years and had really sort of feeling like something was missing, feeling constrained. Academic writing has a lot of rules, and I wanted to break some. And so I started to take classes in a fashion school. And sort of the, you know, the story that goes along with this is that every time I would move out into the world and experiment, I would also experiment with what I wore. And I always used clothing to convey my identity. Even when I was a small child, I would read a book with somebody I really admired and I wanted to be like that person. And so I would dig in my mother's closet or a big trunk full of old curtains, and I would make a costume that would make me feel like that person. And I did this as young as 4 and 5 years old.
Wow.
And so with every exploration, there was sort of a change in what I decided to wear. And so because of that, over time, people always thought, well, she really has an interesting way of dressing. And so it really wasn't about fashion or the fashion system. It really was how I use clothes as a material of expression. And so when I went to the fashion school, being that it was a place of fashion, everybody kept noticing what I was wearing and how I was dressing. And they kept saying things to me like, you should start a fashion blog. You have a really interesting way of getting dressed. And I had kind of been searching for something new to do. That's why I was there in the first place. And so I was like, okay, I can make a website. I know how to write. I know how to research. And I'm interested in clothing. I'm interested in the power that clothing has. And I'm interested in how that might be exploited. And so my partner, uh, was also along with me on many of these creative adventures, even though by day he was a cyclotron engineer. And he happened to be a great photographer.
Mm.
And he bought his first digital camera to help me because he was a film person. And because of that, he did not have Photoshop. And so none of my photos ever, until I started working with other professionals, was retouched in any way.
What what do you think it was about your blog and these pictures that caught the interest of so many? I mean, a lot of people decide I'm going to have a blog, and maybe six people go, right?
Right.
A lot of people have decide I'm going to go on Instagram, and 2 years later they have 34 followers. That was not the case for you.
Right. And I think, one of the things that I write about in my book is that we often think when we're older that we're starting something new, but we're bringing every skill and every experience we've ever had to whatever we're trying to do. And so it's not that it's really new, it's just that we're working in a different context, right? So, one of the key skills that a social worker must have extreme expertise in is engagement skills. We are always having to engage people in making a change, people who want to, people who don't want to. We are having to engage policymakers to support our clients, many of whom they don't like all that much. So my level of engagement skills was super high. Social media is all about engagement.
Mm.
And so I would go on Instagram and I would also look at other blogs. I would leave comments. I would look for interesting people who I would love to follow me and from whom I was learning. And every time in the beginning, until I had this episode where I went viral, I would send a new follower a rose emoji. And so it really was I think I had a big skill set when it came to engagement. But I think the other thing was I was really doing this for fun and I had no outcome. And I really didn't care if people liked me or not. I really, if you look at my early photos, they're all in black and white, which was very, very different because everybody else was doing color. I'm in these very serious poses. I'm always wearing sunglasses. I'm always not smiling. And I have this attitude that says, I'm just here doing my thing. And if you like me, fine. And if you don't, I really don't care. So what? I have no agenda here. And I think that was very fascinating and exciting for people to just see that kind of an attitude.
Tell us about going viral. What happened?
Well, I think, I started the blog in 2014, and in 2017, and up until then, I had no idea that this was something that you can make money from. I was just having fun. I was going to market shows. I was working with design students. I was being featured in independent magazine editorials. It was just exploring something new and wearing amazing things, sometimes crazy things, but really, just learning a whole new area. And so a friend of mine sent me a casting call to show up in Tompkins Square Park. And I did. I had no idea who it was for. And they basically said, you know, we're casting, we're going to do a short video and photos. And if you get chosen, we'll pay you $1,000. And so I showed up. They said, okay, we want you. Show up here the next day. They put all these papers in front of me to sign. And I didn't even look at them. And it turns out I walk into the studio space, and at one end is the photographer Terry Richardson, who's a famous fashion photographer, but kind of got caught in the Me Too movement. That was right before that happened, I think. And then the head of the creative director of Valentino. And so he looks at me and he's like, oh, I like what she's wearing. Maybe put a green skirt on her. And it was really for sunglasses. So we go out. It's me and Terry Richardson and his two assistants. And it's twilight and it's the Lower East Side. And the two of us are talking about what it was like to be young in the 70s in New York City, especially on the Lower East Side. And then they said, okay, if we use your photo, we'll send you an email, blah, blah, blah. So about a month later, I get an email. Well, we're going to use your photo. I'm like, fine, got the check. 2 months later, I start getting texts, emails. My phone is blowing up. And all my friends are like, do you realize that you're in a full page ad for Valentino eyewear in every major fashion magazine in the world? And I'm like, whoa. So this caught the public's attention, and some internet platforms, Bored Panda and BuzzFeed, did an article that said 61-year-old professor, they got my age wrong at the time, but accidentally becomes a fashion icon and her life is changed forever. And shortly before that, I had been signed by a modeling agency as a result of that ad, Elite Models London. And so within 48 hours, I had over 200,000 new followers. And in looking back, that's really when I began to lose control of the story that I wanted to tell about what I was doing as an older woman at that time in my life. And for me, it had nothing to do with my age.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about your book, that you flip the script, right? We always read a lot about how to get
Not
rid of
be
the
old.
wrinkles.
Yeah.
Yeah, how to not be old, how to get rid of the wrinkles and what fillers you need to use, and so many how to dress if you're over 60 or 70 or whatever. And you basically turned that on its head. And you're telling people how to be old, highlighting the positive aspects. Why do you think that's important?
Well, because using fillers and buying new clothes is not going to make you live longer. Having values, having a life of lifelong learning, exploring, curiosity, taking care of your health as opposed to your appearance, and having good connections is what keeps you alive and healthy longer. Spending $1,000 a month on face cream is not going to increase your longevity. And at the end of the day, it's not going to take away wrinkles, because aging is an inevitable process that we all will go through. And I find accepting it means that you will be healthier, happier, you will have much more money to expend on things like, intergenerational wealth for your children, or traveling the world if you never did that, or maybe living in different cities for 6 months at a time, whatever it is that you wanted to do when you were young and you couldn't do. This is a time when you can, if you plan. And so that really is what I'm trying to tell people is, if you really want to live a long time and you want to be healthy, and even if you do all those things too, you have a glow. People are attracted to you. People were attracted to me not because I was classically beautiful, not because I dyed my hair, not because I didn't have wrinkles. I had all those things. I had white hair, I had wrinkles. They were attracted to me because I was living my life on my terms. And I was really saying, I don't care about age, right? When journalists used to try to get me to talk about my age, I would say, if you want to know what I think about aging, look at my photos. I'm performing age, right? And I
Yeah.
was having a damn good time. So I think that's what the attraction was.
The $1,000 that you got paid initially for that Valentino ad was a drop in the bucket. As soon as you built the 200,000 followers that eventually grew to 1 million, um, it became easier, faster to earn money as an influencer. You told me a little bit about your retirement savings arc, and how you didn't have you didn't have a lot of money to put away for retirement when you were working as a social worker. Where were you in terms of your retirement savings journey as all of this started to happen to you, and how did it change your life?
Well, I really didn't start doing any kind of significant saving towards retirement until I was 50 years old. And so I had a good deal of catching up to do. And it was not even at 50 like I could put exorbitant amounts into my account, because I was a professor and I was living in New York City, which is quite expensive. And so, in a way,
Were you worried?
I did have anxiety about it. But I was just, this is the best I can do. I'm plugging away. I knew that my Social Security would be okay because I've been working since I've been 16 years old, sometimes more than one job. And so I figured it's going to be modest. But then I always had this trait that if I needed to make extra money, I would always find a way to do it. And so, when I was a social worker, I would do consulting or training if I was in a real push for money. As a professor, I would be part of grants, which gave me additional money. So, in a way, this accidental icon thing was another kind of consulting gig that I was doing at a time when I needed to make more money. And I feel so grateful in retrospect because it did give me a sort of cushion that allowed me to purchase my home that I have now and not worry. I'm on a fixed income now. I'm thinking about how I can supplement it in the same ways that I have before because I'm healthy. But if it turns out that I'm not okay, I will be comfortable and I have a place to live. And so for me, that's basic security.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier in this conversation was having a plan, the importance of having a plan. When you started to earn this new money or when you were working as a professor, how did you incorporate planning into your financial life?
Well, I have to tell you, one of the most amazing benefits that a lot of academics have is that their retirement accounts are usually done through TIAA-CREF. And one of the great things is for the first time in my life, I had a financial planner who I was working with and who I continue to work with, who's absolutely fabulous. And I have an amazing friend who wrote a really great book that is called The Afro Minimalist, and her name is Christine Platt. And in it, she talks about how your childhood experiences and sort of how your parents were about money really impacts you. And so I grew up without any financial skills whatsoever. And it was really a paycheck to paycheck kind of life. So this was really a big change for me to really start actively thinking I can have control over my financial future. I can plan. And one of the things I did for my daughter when she graduated from college is I gave her the gift of going to a financial planner for her first job. And so now I tell a lot of young women, we have a big failure of imagination when we're young about what life could be like when you're old, right? We do a lot of reading things, like what to expect when you're expecting, and how do you have a relationship and how do you make a career, but no one ever teaches you how to be old. And so, and in fact, when I started doing research for my book, most of the books about aging are about how to mitigate aging, how to not make aging happen, how to, you know, sort of, it's like fighting aging in a way, instead of accepting it and accepting the inevitability of it, and then being planful about it.
I mean, what's striking to me about your planning experience is that, well, first of all, it started before the blogging and the influencing took over. When you were earning a professor's salary, did you find the experience of working with a planner made a difference in starting to help you make up for that lost time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you are not, if you do not have a history, or you have not been taught how to be financially savvy, then as soon as you have that realization, if you can access someone to support you, someone to help you in the planning process, I would so recommend it, because this has been, I now feel really competent. I was talking about it with my partner. I had a little session with my financial planner, and I was in control of the session. I was like, I think we should do this. I think this would be a good move. And she concurred with everything I said. But I feel now like I am quite competent about it. And fortunately, when I started to get all this money in, because I had that little bit of time of understanding the importance of planning, unlike a lot of other people that I was hanging around with who were spending their money as soon as they got it, I was putting every cent away. And this really, when the pandemic happened, everybody stopped getting work because
Right.
fashion shut down, supply chain shut down. So everybody was in quarantine. And there were a lot of influencers who were like, oh my God, I can't pay my rent. I can't pay my mortgage. And for me, I had not invested in trips to Paris and all the other things to get known. And I put it all in the bank. And that allowed me to weather that down period. And it also then helped me to finance a different kind of life that the pandemic and everything that went along with it made me want to have.
You left the world of influencing.
Yes.
You basically you had a gravy train, let's just acknowledge it, and you turned it down. Um, why did you do that, and how did that impact your life?
Well, I think for me, I, like many people, were really impacted by the pandemic and the immediate aftermath of it. And I started turning to writing again on my blog during the pandemic instead of posting on Instagram. Although I started to do what I call mini blogging on Instagram. I started to write very long captions
Mm-hmm.
that were not sponsored posts at all, but just what I was thinking and feeling during the whole experience. And a lot of women were resonating with that. And a lot of people really said, I'm going to change my life after this. And a lot of people said it, but once everything opened up and, influencers were saying, oh, I'm not going to jet around to fashion shows because that's harming the environment. And of course, when it started again. Many people are back on a jet. But for me, it was profound. And also, I think I had lost myself a bit because it's very easy to get commodified and become a brand yourself. And so I felt like I lost a bit of my humanity and was not feeling great about it. And so the pandemic really made me and my partner reflect and say, what do we want our life to be like moving forward? And at the same time, in 2019 is when the word influencer was in the dictionary for the first time. And there's a big difference between being a fashion blogger and being an influencer, because fashion bloggers were really writers. And many of us started a writing career through a blog.
Yes.
And we were not selling things, right? And then some fashion bloggers started to have affiliate links and some paid things, but a lot of us did not. And then when the work all started to be on Instagram is when this whole thing called influencing, began to happen. And what happened for me was, prior to that, when I was fashion blogging, a lot of the media and a lot of the press, they spoke about me as an individual person. This is a 61-year-old professor or a 65-year-old professor, and she reinvented and she did something new and different. And it was sort of a reinvention story. And it was kind of a story for young people that it's never too late, that you don't have to do everything exciting in your life before you're 30. And so once it became an influencer story, it became, there started to be, the press was, oh, look at these people with gray hair. They're Instagrammers and they're senior influencers. And it kind of stripped away all of your individuality and just lumped you in with people on the sole criteria of your age, even though I had nothing in common with most of the people who I was being featured with. And so between that and then when you're working in influencing, you lose creative control.
Yeah, if they're paying you to post it, they get to have a lot of license about what you say.
Right. And that was different from my time as a fashion blogger, because when people wanted to hire me, they wanted to hire me because of me. And then they let me do whatever narrative I wanted. Whereas when you're doing influencing, these are the kind of pictures. This is the caption you have to write. These are required hashtags. And it really, I found myself just not having ethics and just promoting stuff that was no longer fashion. And it was just, selling things. And that did not feel good to me.
In the book and in your life, as you focus on how to be old, you have a lot of advice or lessons for people around their money. And I want to know, what are the 3 or 4 most important things you would tell people that they need to know to be an old person and be managing their money or have money to manage?
I think number one is to realize that from my generation on, because of healthcare and education and other things that began to be more accessible, starting with my generation, that we are living longer, and especially women. And so I think because we don't have this imaginative vision for ourselves when we are young about older life is that we are not funding for the length of time that we are now all living. You know, my mom lived till 95. That means that I have 25 to 30 more years to fund.
Yes.
Right? That's like a whole adulthood. And when I read the statistics on the average income that retired people are making, the vast majority of them, it's like 50,000 and under a year.
Yep.
And so I think my top would be, I advise all young women, make a vision board of who you want to be when you're an older woman, and then start thinking about how you're going to fund that. And that maybe instead of paying $1,000 to get some fillers, that you might want to invest it into a lifestyle instead of an appearance. And so that would be number one. I think that a lot of the things that keep us healthy do not cost money. And so I think, you know, keeping your stress level low, plant-based diet, getting enough sleep, strength and aerobic. You do that starting when you're 30, and you have a much greater chance of being healthy when you're older. The other thing we have been thinking about, which people don't like to think about, is how do you want to die? And what does that mean for financial planning? So one of the things my partner and I have been very clear about is we do not want to be in a nursing home. We do not want to be anywhere other than our own home. And so one of the things we've been talking about with our financial planner is how do we begin to save to get all of the support and resources that we might need to make that happen. So maybe we're going to defer, you know, a new car and keep the one we have because it's perfectly fine, and put that money into that kind of an account. And then I think the third question is, if you do have children and grandchildren, how, if at all, because it's your choice and your money, right, do you want to think about a legacy for them? And so these are all of the things that we've been talking about and we've been planning for. And the other thing is, I think sometimes women don't take control of their financial future until they're faced with maybe a spouse dying or something like that. So I would say, regardless of, you know, your spouse might be a hedge fund manager, but do your own finances. In my relationship, we've always had separate financial things. This has been a good learning experience for me because I've had to be in control and I've had to learn and I've had to do it. And the other thing is, you know, my partner and I made a decision. We were both divorced, and we made a decision that we didn't want to get married. So we have a stack of legal documents about this big that we've had to put in place because we are not married, to accommodate for all these things. So I guess that word planning keeps emerging over and over. And I think for me, if you plan for the financial part, then all the rest of it can be about taking risk. It could be about jumping in, having a new adventure, exploring a curiosity. It makes, you know, sort of letting yourself go in every other facet of your life without a plan and just being in the moment and enjoying it. It's like a platform from which you can dive off. And so that, I feel like I have a platform right now, and I'm thinking about what is going to be my next dive.
I love that image, that visual. I'm going to carry it with me out of this conversation. Lynn Slater, the book is called How to Be Old: Lessons in Living Boldly from the Accidental Icon. Where can our listeners and our viewers buy it? Where can they find out more about you?
Well, I've been, of course, it's in the big Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but I've been so pleased to see that a lot of independent bookstores have been carrying my book. So I would first check out your local independent bookstore. And then you could also go on the Penguin Random House website, and it will give you various choices from where you can order it. But if you really want to kind of hang out with me, I would recommend that you go to my Substack. Right now, it's free subscription. There will always be a free subscription, although I'm thinking about what might be value added to make it paid, if that's the dive off the platform I want to do. But that's where I'm doing a lot of thinking and reflecting about this time of life. And the best thing about my Substack is that people who follow me also make incredible comments and suggestions. So my Instagram is probably the only social media I'm going to be keeping, and I don't post on it all that much, but it's at Icon Accidental. And just a little thing about that is you can't change your name on Instagram if you have a blue check without their permission.
Mm-hmm.
And you can never take your followers to any other platform. And so that's why I love Substack, because my followers are my followers. There's no advertisements. You're not going to be annoyed by things popping up in between whatever. And there's lots of good conversations. And it's a platform where a lot of women are investing in other women.
Yes.
And I love it for that reason.
Yeah, I do. I do as well. I will be signing up for your Substack. I'm sure that a lot of people will as well. Lynn Slater, thank you so much. And for anybody who's looking for more information from the Alliance for Lifetime Income, particularly on planning, if you're looking to get started, you should be getting our newsletter. You can go to protectedincome.org/subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much.